Okay, let's dive in. Have you ever looked at something ancient, maybe a massive stone structure, a strange artifact, or read about a group of people from way back when and just thought, how did they do that?
Oh, absolutely. Or even just, what was that for?
Exactly. The past is just packed with these mysteries, aren't they? Things that seem to challenge, well, everything we think we know about history, science, human capability.
Yeah, these aren't just, dusty old questions for academics. They're real puzzles. They hint at maybe lost knowledge or ingenuity we didn't expect, or just how complex human history actually was. We're still trying to figure it all out.
Right, and that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive. We're looking into a fantastic source that pulls together almost 50 of these historical enigmas. It's the book Hidden History: Lost Civilizations, Secret Knowledge, and Ancient Mysteries by Brian Haughton.
What I really appreciate about Houghton's approach in this book is, first, it's global, mysteries from all over. And second, he tries to give you a balanced perspective.
Also.
Well, he presents the evidence gathered by, university researchers, the academics, but he also includes theories from what he calls avocational investigators, people outside the mainstream.
Okay.
And he lays out the facts, the interpretations, but then he sort of invites you, the reader, to weigh it all up and make up your own mind. It's like being given the pieces of the puzzle.
That sounds perfect for what we want to do here. So our mission for this deep dive is basically to pull out the most fascinating bits, the surprising facts, the key debates from the book for you.
Yeah, think of it as a shortcut, a way to get up to speed on some genuinely perplexing historical puzzles without having to read, well, dozens of different sources.
We're going to look at some incredible, mysterious places, some actually still facing threats today, which is pretty wild.
And baffling artifacts, too, things that might hint at technologies we just didn't think were possible back then.
And people, enigmatic people whose very existence or identity is still argued about.
So much to cover.
Definitely. Let's unpack this. All right, let's start our journey with places that seem to hold deep secrets in their very stones or landscapes. The book covers a lot, but let's focus on a few that jumped out. First up, Petra, the incredible Rose-Red City.
Ah, yeah. That line, Rose-Red City, half as old as time, from the poem. It really sticks, doesn't it? Petra is just astonishing. A city mostly carved straight into sandstone cliffs and deliberately hidden, tucked away.
And for centuries, people have argued about its main purpose, right? Was it primarily a fortress, a big commercial hub on the trade route?
Or fundamentally a sacred city. What's really fascinating is that the archaeology seems to suggest it was, probably all of those things. Just maybe different aspects were more important at different times over its long history. You can see that in the tombs alone. There's such a variety. Grand royal tombs, yeah, but also simpler public burial spots. And the source even mentions these shaft tombs.
Shaft tombs, what are they?
Well, the speculation is they might have been for criminals, possibly even buried alive. It's quite a grim thought.
Wow. And the engineering there must have been something else.
Oh, totally mind-blowing. Just getting there through that narrow, mile-long gorge, the sick. It's so dramatic.
Yeah.
And then you see the evidence of Nemetana hydraulic engineering everywhere. These complex systems of water channels cut right into the rock, originally carrying water through clay pipes. It let a whole city thrive in the middle of a desert.
Incredible. The book mentions some specific buildings, too.
It does, like the so-called Temple of Douchers, also known as Qasr al-Bint Firon, that dates from around 30 BC to AD 40, and the Temple of the Winged Lions.
Winged lions.
Yeah, dedicated to the goddess Alat. Some people suggest it might even be the Temple of Aphrodite that's mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls. That one was built around AD 28, but then, tragically, destroyed by a big earthquake in 363.
It's amazing we have such specific dates for some parts, yet the overall identity, the main point of the city across all that time, is still so debated.
Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting, but in a, worrying way. This ancient mystery is actually facing a very modern threat.
What do you mean?
The book highlights that there's a plan for a new railway line, scheduled to run right through the ancient site of Petra.
No, seriously?
Yeah, think about that. Potentially destroying priceless archaeological evidence before it can even be properly studied or even recorded.
That's awful. It really brings it home that these aren't just pictures in a book. They're real places, vulnerable to, us now.
Precisely. The World Monuments Fund has put other threatened sites on its endangered list, like the lost Greek city of Helike, also in the book, destroyed by an earthquake ages ago. The story of Petra, this amazing mystery, it's still unfolding, and it's genuinely under pressure.
Okay, moving from rock-cut cities to a giant mound of earth in England. Silbury Hill.
Right, near the famous Avebury stone circle. This huge prehistoric earthwork is actually older than Stonehenge, and its purpose. Still a complete mystery. Nobody really knows why they built it.
Haven't people tried to find out? Excavations and things?
Oh, yeah. There are attempts way back, 1776, 1849, but the big ones were in the late 60s, early 70s, led by Professor Richard Atkinson. They didn't really find many artifacts inside or, obvious clues like a central burial.
Huh. So what did they find?
Well, they learned more about how it might have been built. Atkinson thought it was maybe done by stacking flat layers of chalk and soil.
Mm-hmm.
But then a more recent survey, I think around 2001, suggested something else. Evidence for maybe a spiral ledge or path winding its way up the mound.
Spiral path. What would that mean?
If that's right, it could suggest it wasn't just like a heap of hearth. Maybe it had a ritual function. Perhaps processions wound their way up. It kind of connects it to spiral patterns you see in other Neolithic art, like at Newgrange in Ireland.
And you mentioned it's near Avebury.
Exactly. Context is absolutely crucial here. Silbury Hill isn't isolated. It's part of this massive, complex, Neolithic ritual landscape.
Yeah.
You've got the West Kennet Long Barrow nearby, the huge Avebury Henge itself. So its meaning is almost certainly tied into that whole ceremonial area. Maybe it was about physically marking the land, preserving memories of ancestors in a time before writing, sort of embodying history.
But like Petra, it faces modern issues too.
Yeah, unfortunately. English heritage works hard to conserve it, like filling in those old excavation tunnels to stop collapses. But it still suffers from erosion, mostly from, enthusiastic visitors ignoring the signs and cleaning it, an ancient ritual site literally being worn away by modern feet.
Another iconic mystery, instantly recognizable, the Great Sphinx, right there on the Giza Plateau in Egypt.
The biggest ancient sculpture still standing. Massive thing, 241 feet long.
And the standard view is it's Pharaoh Chephren, right?
Mm-hmm.
Built it around the same time as his pyramid.
That's the general consensus among most Egyptologists, yeah. 4th dynasty, maybe around 2540 BC. Seems logical it's right there with his pyramid complex.
I sense a...
Well, here's the puzzle, the source points out. There's a really striking lack of inscriptions. Anywhere. Not on the Sphinx itself, not in any documents from that time that explicitly say Chephren built this or even mention its construction at all.
That is odd for the Egyptians, isn't it? They usually labeled everything.
They often did, yeah. So, what does this lack of hard proof mean? It means, while the Chephren theory is definitely the leading one, the absence of that smoking gun, that definitive inscription, keeps the door open. It allows other possibilities, keeps the debate about who really built it and exactly when alive and kicking.
It's amazing how these fundamental questions about such famous landmarks persist.
Absolutely. And the book, it touches on so many other places that raise these big questions.
Like what else?
Well, there's Easter Island. What was the function of those giant stone sentinels? The Moai, the endless search for the mythical golden city of El Dorado.
Ah, yes, El Dorado.
Debates over whether Newgrange in Ireland was mainly an observatory, a temple, or a tomb, or maybe all three. The purpose of Machu Picchu high in the Andes.
Still debated. I thought we knew that one.
There are still different interpretations, yeah. And the Great Pyramid, not just how it was built, but its age and original function are still subject to some pretty intense, sometimes controversial debates.
Right.
Oh, and it corrects a common idea about the Library of Alexandria.
Mm-hmm.
People often think of one big fire.
Yeah, it's Caesar. Right.
Well, the source suggests its destruction was actually much more gradual, happened over centuries, multiple events, not just one catastrophic blaze.
Huh.
And then you've got places like Chichen Itza in Mexico with its intense ball courts and that quite chilling wall of skulls. Or the incredibly complex palace at Knossos on Crete tied into the Minotaur legend. It really is a global tour of puzzling places.
Okay, so from mysterious places, let's pivot to puzzling objects. Things ancient people left behind that just make you scratch your head. Starting with maybe the most visually striking, the Nazca Lines in Peru.
Yeah, those are incredible. Giant geoglyphs, these massive designs etched into the desert floor, covering a huge area, something like 37 miles long, a mile wide.
And the really weird thing, as the book notes, is that a lot of them, the figures especially, you can only really see them properly from high up, from the air.
Exactly. You've got these dead straight lines going for miles, geometric shapes, but also these huge figures of animals, monkeys, birds, spiders.
So the big question, the one driving all the research, is just why? Why did they create these? The sheer amount of time and effort must mean they were incredibly important to the Nazca culture.
Absolutely vital, you'd think. And the theories are, well, they're all over the place. Were they astronomical, aligning with stars or solstices?
Like a giant observatory.
Possibly. Or maybe ritual pathways for ceremonies? A massive calendar. Some have even suggested they're a map of underground water sources, crucial in a desert.
Have any of those theories been tested?
Yeah, Maria Reixas spent decades studying potential astronomical links, but later tests, like by the astronomer Gerald Hawkins, found relatively few statistically significant alignments, which suggests, maybe that wasn't the main point, or at least not the only point.
And then, because you can only see them from the air.
Inevitably, yeah. You get the extraterrestrial theories, people like James Moseley, Eric von Daniken, famous for this, suggesting they were landing strips for alien spacecraft.
Right. The ancient astronaut stuff.
But as Maria Reich herself pointed out, there's a very practical problem. The desert floor there, it's soft sand and gravel. Any heavy spacecraft trying to land would just sink or get stuck.
Good point.
And the source makes another important point here. These alien theories often carry this underlying assumption, don't they, that the local Nazca people themselves were too primitive to have come up with or built something so amazing without outside help.
Yeah, that's a bit condescending, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder whose capabilities we might be underestimating.
Exactly. Are we sometimes too quick to dismiss the ingenuity and understanding of ancient cultures?
Speaking of baffling objects,
Yeah.
the Phaistos disc from Crete.
Oh, another great one. Found back in 1903 at the Minoan Palace site of Phaistos. It's this fired clay tablet, looks a bit like a round biscuit, with symbols stamped into both sides in a spiral.
We have no idea what it says.
Pretty much everything about it is controversial. Its purpose, its meaning. Total enigmas. People have suggested it's a religious hymn, partly because it was found in a temple area and has repeating groups of symbols, like a refrain.
Okay.
But other ideas, maybe an adventure story, a calendar, a call to arms, a magic spell, a legal document, even a game board.
Wow. So anything goes.
Almost. People
Yeah.
have been trying to decipher it for over 100 years. Some have claimed it's Greek geometry, others an astronomical computer. But none of these attempts have really convinced many experts. It's stubbornly undeciphered.
And we're sure it's Minoan from Crete.
Well, it was found on Crete.
Ah.
But the source notes there's no absolute proof it was made there. The clay hasn't been definitively sourced, I believe.
Yeah.
So it could even be an import from somewhere else. It's just this tantalizing glimpse of something locked away behind a script we can't read.
Okay, let's tackle a really big one, maybe the most debated artifact globally.
Ah.
The Shroud of Turin.
Ah, yes. The cloth that some believe is the actual burial shroud of Jesus, bearing the image of his body.
Its history is incredibly complicated.
Very. Some try to trace its origins back centuries, linking it potentially to the legendary Edessa image or Mandy Lion. There's a description from AD 944 by a writer named Gregory Referendarius that sounds like it could be describing a full burial shroud with a body image. And one theory is that maybe it came to Europe with crusaders after the sack of Constantinople in 1204, but the documented history gets clearer later.
What's the evidence usually cited for it being, well, a fake? A medieval forgery?
Two main things usually come up. First, there's a letter from a French bishop, Darcis, written in 1389. He claims his predecessor had investigated the shroud earlier and had even found the artist who painted it.
You found the artist. That sounds pretty definitive.
Well, it's a claim in a letter. The artist wasn't named. And then, of course, the big one, the 1988 carbon-14 dating tests. 3 different labs dated samples of the cloth.
And they all came back.
They placed the cloth's origin between 1260 and 1390 AD, right in the medieval period when it first clearly appears in Europe. That was huge and controversial, obviously.
But there's counter-evidence, too. The source mentions that.
Yes, absolutely. There was a big scientific investigation in the late 70s, the STURP project. They did extensive tests and found no evidence of paint, pigments, dyes, or powders on the fibers that could account for the image. They couldn't explain how it was formed.
Okay, so not paint. What else?
There's textile analysis. Someone named Fleury Lemberg, a textile expert, argued the weave itself, a particular kind of herringbone twill, is consistent with textiles found in the Middle East in the 1st century, like cloth found at Masada. And maybe most intriguingly, a 2004 analysis looked at the image on the back of the shroud. It's much fainter, but it's there. And crucially, it's extremely superficial, just on the very top fibrils.
What does that mean?
It makes it really hard to explain how paint could have seeped through from the front to create that, or how early photographic techniques could have done it. The image formation itself remains a huge mystery.
It really does sound like the evidence pulls in completely different directions.
It really does. And that complexity, that conflicting data, is precisely why the debate is still so passionate and, well, completely unresolved.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. The Baghdad battery. This sounds like something out of science fiction.
Doesn't it? It was discovered near Baghdad in 1938, dated roughly somewhere between 250 BC and AD 640, so a huge range. It's basically just a small ceramic jar, maybe 5 inches high. Inside, there's a copper cylinder, and inside that is an iron rod. The top was sealed with asphalt, bitumen.
And someone thought this was a battery.
Yeah, an archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig first proposed it back then. He suggested it could function as a primitive electric cell if you filled it with an acidic liquid like vinegar or grape juice.
Could it?
Well, modern tests have built replicas, and yeah, using things like grape juice, they've managed to generate a voltage, somewhere between, say, 0.8 volts and maybe up to 2 volts. Not much, but it's definitely electricity.
Wow. So what did Koenig think they used it for?
He speculated it might have been used for electroplating, using that small electric current to plate a thin layer of gold onto silver objects, maybe jewelry or small statues. He thought maybe they linked several batteries together to get more power.
Has anyone tried that?
Yeah.
Electroplating with a replica?
Yes. A researcher named Arne Egbrink reportedly did manage to electroplate a small silver statuette using a replica setup, though the gold layer achieved was apparently extremely thin, just microns thick.
So the puzzle remains. If they could make electricity, what did they actually use it for? Was it electroplating? Or maybe something else?
Some have suggested maybe medical uses, like pain relief. The ancient Greeks knew rubbing amber created static electricity and sometimes used it for pain. Could this have been something similar? We don't know.
And where did they get this knowledge? Was it widespread or just this one find?
That's the thing. It seems pretty isolated. We don't have lots of these turning up. And the source points out, while it functions as a battery, it's incredibly inefficient compared to even early modern batteries.
And there's a sad footnote to this story.
Yeah, really tragic. The original Baghdad battery artifact was apparently looted from the National Museum of Iraq in Baghdad during the chaos in 2003, and its current whereabouts are unknown.
Oh no. So another piece of the puzzle, potentially lost forever.
It seems so.
The book covers other intriguing artifacts too, right? Things that maybe didn't pan out.
Exactly, like the Koso artifact, found inside a rock. Looked like some kind of mechanical device. Huge hype for a while, but it almost certainly seems to be just a 1920s spark plug that somehow got encased in mineral deposits.
So not ancient technology.
Probably not. It's a great example, though, of how secrecy around a find and, let's be honest, wishful thinking can really fuel a modern mystery.
But then there are things that are genuinely ancient and advanced.
Absolutely. The Antikythera mechanism is the prime example. Found in an ancient Greek shipwreck, it's this incredibly complex device of bronze gears. Basically an astronomical computer.
It's from ancient Greece.
Yeah. It could predict eclipses, track planetary movements. It showed a level of sophisticated mechanical technology that we previously thought wasn't equaled for another 1,000 years, until medieval clocks. It just makes you wonder how much advanced knowledge like that was developed back then and then simply lost to history.
That's mind-boggling.
It really is. And the book also touches on debates around things sometimes called ancient aircraft models, little gold pendants from South America that look a bit like jets, the wooden saguaro bird from Egypt.
Oh, I've seen pictures of that bird.
And even controversial interpretations of hieroglyphs, like the ones in a temple at Abydos that some people think look like a helicopter and a submarine.
Okay, that sounds a bit more out there.
Well, the mainstream view is usually pareidolia, seeing familiar shapes in random patterns or overlapping carvings. But these objects and images collectively, they keep pushing us to reconsider just how technically savvy ancient cultures might have been and what forms their technology took.
All right, let's move into our final section. Enigmatic people and beings. Mysterious individuals or groups whose stories still fascinate and puzzle us. Starting with someone very real, but discovered under incredible circumstances. Otzi the Iceman.
Yeah, Otzi, a literal frozen moment in time, discovered by hikers in the Alps back in 1991. He's the oldest naturally preserved human body ever found, dating back to around 3200 BC, the Copper Age.
But his discovery wasn't exactly smooth, was it?
No, sadly, his initial extraction from the ice was a bit clumsy before people realized how incredibly old and important he was, so the body suffered some damage right at the start.
But one scientist got to study him.
Oh, the analysis has provided an incredible window into life back then. We know roughly how tall he was, about 5'2". He's aged likely between 40 and 50. What he ate recently, things like unleavened bread, some roots, deer meat. Even the season he died in late spring or early summer, based on pollen found in his gut.
And how did he die? Was that a mystery?
Initially, yes. Theories ranged from freezing to exhaustion. But later, X-rays found something crucial. An arrowhead, made of flint, lodged deep in his left shoulder.
Oh, so he was shot.
That's the leading theory now. It seems the arrow severed a major artery, and he probably bled to death quite quickly. There were other injuries too, cuts, bruises suggesting he might have been involved in a fight shortly before being shot, maybe running from enemies.
And there were some other weird details, something about DNA and a curse.
Yeah, some intriguing side notes. DNA analysis apparently suggested he might have been infertile. And then there's the whole Iceman's curse idea.
The curse, like Tutankhamun's.
Kind of. Several people involved with Otzi's discovery and study died over the following years, some in accidents. It led to media speculation about a curse. Though, skeptics are very quick to point out it's likely just coincidence, given the number of people involved and the passage of time.
Okay, from ancient Europe frozen in ice, let's go to Indonesia and hobbits, the Floresians.
Right. Real-life hobbits. Discovered in Liangbua Cave on the island of Flores in 2004, it was a huge discovery. Remains from at least 9 individuals were found, and some dated up to surprisingly recent times, maybe as late as 12,000 years ago, almost historical times.
And they were genuinely tiny.
Yes, that's the defining feature. Adults stood only about 3 feet tall, and they had incredibly small brains, about the size of a chimpanzee's, which is why they got nicknamed hobbits after Tolkien's characters.
So what's the main theory? Who were they?
The primary theory put forward by the discovery team is that they represent a distinct and previously unknown species of human. They named it Homo floresiensis.
A whole new human species.
Yeah. The idea is they might have descended from an earlier human ancestor, probably Homo erectus, who reached Flores hundreds of thousands of years ago. Then, due to living in isolation on the island with limited resources, they evolved their small size. It's a known phenomenon called island dwarfism. We see it in other animals.
Well, this is debated, isn't it? I remember hearing controversy.
Oh, big time. This is where it gets really interesting, and the debate is quite fierce. Some prominent researchers strongly disagree with the new species idea.
What do they think then?
They argue these individuals aren't a separate species at all. They claim they are simply modern humans, Homo sapiens, like us, but perhaps they were pygmies who also suffered from a pathological condition, specifically microcephaly.
Microcephaly, the condition that causes a small head and brain.
Exactly. They argue that could explain the small brain size.
But what did the original discoverers say to that?
Well, the arguments against the microcephaly theory are pretty strong, as the book outlines. First, very few individuals with severe microcephaly survived to adulthood, let alone 9 of them found together. Second, the Flores skulls, while small, don't really show the specific deformities usually associated with microcephaly in modern humans. Their skull shape is different. And maybe the most compelling point, finding 9 such tiny individuals, all showing consistent features, in the same place. It makes it seem much less likely they were just isolated cases of a rare developmental defect. It looks more like a population characteristic.
So what does this whole intense debate tell us then?
It really forces us to confront fundamental questions, doesn't it? How do we define a species based only on fossil bones? How much variation was possible within archaic human groups, or even within our own species? The Floresians genuinely challenge those boundaries.
Okay, let's travel across Asia now. The Tarim mummies, found in Western China, but looking European.
That's right. These are exceptionally well-preserved mummies thanks to the dry desert conditions of the Tarim Basin. Some date back as far as 1800 BC, others up to around 8400. And what's striking is many of them have features typically considered European or Caucasian light-colored hair, sometimes blonde or reddish, long noses, taller stature.
So the mystery is, who were these people? What were Caucasians doing way out there so early?
Exactly. The evidence suggests they probably weren't just one single tribe or group that arrived all at once. It looks more like multiple waves of migration eastward over a very long period.
Does the book connect them to any known groups from ancient history or texts?
It does try to link them to possibilities mentioned in ancient Chinese sources. For instance, they might be related to the white people with long hair, described in texts from the 1st millennium BC, associated with the jade trade.
Okay.
They could also be connected to a group called the Yuezhi, mentioned around 645 BC, also involved in jade trading. Later Yuezhi coinage seems to depict Caucasoid features.
Right.
And perhaps most famously, they might be linked to the Tocharians. The Tocharians are known as the easternmost speakers of an Indo-European language. Chinese texts describe people in that region, possibly Tocharians, as having blonde or red hair and blue or green eyes. And frescoes found in the area also depict people with clearly European features.
So what's the bigger picture here? What does this all suggest?
It paints a fascinating picture of ancient Central Asia and Western China. It suggests it was far more ethnically diverse and much more connected to the West through trade routes like the early Silk Road, much earlier than we often traditionally think. It complicates the map.
Let's talk about the Druids now. Mysterious pagan priests from Celtic Europe. Always shrouded in, well, mist and legend.
Definitely. They pose a huge enigma, mainly because they deliberately left no written records themselves. Their traditions were oral. So what we think we know about them comes almost entirely from outside sources.
Who were active when?
Roughly from the 2nd century BC up to maybe the 1st century AD, when Roman power really expanded.
And these outside sources, who wrote them?
Primarily Greek and Roman writers. And frankly, they often portrayed the Druids quite negatively, sometimes as savage, barbaric figures involved in human sacrifice.
Wait, the Wicker Man image comes to mind.
Exactly. That comes from Caesar. Others mention sacrifices involving arrows, though the book notes a famous find at Stonehenge of a man killed by arrows actually predates the known Druid period. So we have to be careful connecting everything.
Were there other sources?
Yes, later accounts come from early Irish and Welsh literature, but these were usually written down centuries after the Druids' peak, often by Christian monks who might have edited or reshaped the stories. So we get conflicting tales of secret rites, but also hints of their roles as respected shamans, teachers, judges, and philosophers within Celtic society.
And the Romans actively suppressed them.
Oh, absolutely. Especially under emperors like Claudius. They saw the organized Druidic priesthood as a potential source of resistance. The most famous example is the Roman massacre of Druids on the island of Anglesey, or Mona in Wales.
But they disappear completely?
As an organized, powerful priesthood across Gaul and Britain, yes, Roman pressure seems to have ended that. But the traditions likely persisted, especially in places like Ireland, which Rome never conquered. There, figures who seem like Druids continued as influential advisors to kings and chieftains right up until Christianity became dominant.
Any famous names?
Irish legends feature figures like Cathbad, who was an advisor, or the powerful shaman Mug Ruth, described with very distinctive, almost otherworldly appearance. They show the lasting cultural impact even after their main power was broken.
Okay, final person, or perhaps legend, the Queen of Sheba.
A truly significant figure, appearing prominently in major religious texts. The Hebrew Bible, the New Testament mentions her, and the Quran. She's legendary for her incredible wealth, her wisdom, and especially her famous visit to King Solomon in Jerusalem.
But the puzzle is, was she real? Is there historical truth behind the legend?
That's the core question. The source points out there's actually very little independent evidence, archaeological or from other historical texts of the time, that directly confirms her existence or her visit to Solomon. The historical record from that period, around the 10th century BC, is largely silent about a powerful queen ruling Sheba and visiting Israel.
So where might Sheba have been, if it existed?
Archaeology in the context provides some clues. Her kingdom, Sheba, or Saba, was most likely located in the region of modern-day Yemen in southern Arabia, or possibly in Ethiopia, around Axum, or maybe she even ruled territories in both areas. This fits with the biblical account mentioning the valuable gifts she brought Solomon, like frankincense and myrrh, which came from that region.
And the date, around 950 BC, generally fits with Solomon's reign.
Yes, the timing works reasonably well, but some researchers view the biblical story itself less as pure history and more as a narrative maybe written down later, intended primarily to emphasize King Solomon's own glory, wisdom, and international influence. Her visit highlights his greatness.
But there's a very strong Ethiopian tradition about her, too, isn't there?
No, absolutely. A very powerful and important one, laid out in the Ethiopian national epic, the Kebra Nagast.
What does that say?
It tells the story that the Queen of Sheba, known in Ethiopia as Makeda, visited Solomon, and they had a son together. This son was named Menelik I, and he's considered the founder of the Ethiopian imperial dynasty, the Solomonic line that ruled for centuries.
Wow. And there's more. Something about the Ark of the Covenant.
Yes, the legend dramatically claims that when Menelik later visited his father Solomon in Jerusalem, he secretly managed to take the Ark of the Covenant back with him to Ethiopia. And according to Ethiopian Orthodox Christian belief, The Ark remains in Ethiopia to this day, housed in a special chapel in the city of Aksum.
That's an incredible story, connecting Ethiopia directly to Solomon and the Ark.
It's a profoundly important story for Ethiopian history, culture, and faith. But again, separating the verifiable historical core, if any, from the layers of deeply held belief and legendary embellishment is the huge challenge, like so many of these enigmas.
And the book, it touches on even more figures like this.
It really does. It dives into the historical basis, or lack thereof, for Robin Hood. It looks at the Amazons, those legendary warrior women, and how recent archaeology in Russia finding graves of armed women might actually lend some support to their existence.
Interesting.
It discusses different astronomical theories trying to explain the Star of Bethlehem that the Magi followed. The very strange medieval tale of the Green Children, who supposedly appeared in an English village.
Green children.
Yeah, a bizarre little story. And Apollonius of Tyana, this ancient philosopher and wonder worker whose life story has sometimes been compared, controversially, to those of Jesus or St. Paul. And, of course, the perennial search for a historical King Arthur.
Ah, Arthur. Is he real?
The book explores the idea that Arthur is likely a composite figure, maybe based on one or more real post-Roman British chieftains, but heavily overlaid with centuries of myth, folklore, and later medieval romance, linking the legend to potential sites like Cadbury Castle. It's a classic historical mystery.
Wow. Okay. We have really journeyed through an incredible collection of mysteries, all drawn from Brian Haughton's Hidden History. It's quite a tour.
It really is. From an ancient city like Petra, literally carved from rock and now facing modern threats, to the truly strange debate around the tiny Floresian hobbits.
The conflicting evidence surrounding something as famous as the Shroud of Turin. The potential for lost high technology hinted at by that amazing anti-Thera mechanism.
And things like the tar mummies, completely changing our picture of ancient China's connections to the West. History is just clearly full of these deep, fascinating puzzles.
And exploring them, like Haughton does in the book, it really drives home that our understanding of the past is never set in stone, is it?
Not at all. It's always evolving. New discoveries happen, new scientific techniques emerge, new interpretations are proposed. We constantly have to balance different kinds of evidence.
Right. Scientific analysis, archaeological finds, historical texts, even legends and oral traditions sometimes hold clues.
Exactly. And sometimes, as the book shows really well with things like the Koso artifact or even aspects of the Shroud debate, we have to be really critical. We need to evaluate claims carefully, try to distinguish solid evidence from belief or wishful thinking, and sometimes even identify, well, misinterpretations or outright hoaxes.
Ultimately, these deep dives, they aren't just about collecting old facts, are they? They challenge us.
They really do. They make us think critically about human ingenuity across thousands of years, about the very real possibility of lost knowledge, about the limits of what we can actually know for sure about the distant past.
And maybe about the stories we tell ourselves about where we come from.
Precisely. The book, as we said at the start, invites you, the listener, to look at all this evidence, consider the different theories, the scientific ones, the historical ones, and yeah, sometimes the more imaginative ones too, and kind of weigh it all up for yourself.
So, thinking about everything we've touched on, what stands out most to you from this collection of mysteries?
That's tough. Maybe just the sheer variety and how interconnected some seem.
Yeah. And what does the simple fact that these ancient enigmas persist, that people are still debating Petra's function, or the Sphinx's age, or who the Floresians were, what does that tell us about our ongoing search for understanding the world and our past?
That the search is far from over, I suppose. There are always more questions than answers.
Definitely. The search continues.